Hi, folks. I'm here with my fellow trainer, Melanie Gibbons Taylor, licensed clinician, friend of the Advocacy Academy. And Melanie, I'm hoping you might be willing to chat with me for a few minutes about a heavy subject, shame. Sound okay to you?
Yep.
Okay, I appreciate that you're game, even though I don't know too many people who would say, "Sign me up. Let's talk about shame." But I suspect that you work with clients who have been exposed to traumatic events and then tell you about the shame that they feel. So, what kinds of things do you hear people say that indicate to you like they might be wrestling with some shame?
Yeah, and this is why I love talking about shame, even though it's such a difficult topic, because there are common threads that people say, that I hear clients say, and ways that they respond, which indicate feeling shame. A lot of times people will feel anger and they will be very angry, even though underneath that is really shame. They will say things like, this is all my fault, or this is because of me, or I caused this. And that is really internalizing the traumatic event, which is a very common experience when someone is feeling shame.
Yeah, and you're giving such good examples of how people rarely come out and use the S word. Like, "Hi, Melanie, I have shame." It's
Exactly.
not like that. They say other things, but you're trained well enough to know like that sounds like shame, and it's just so common. And I think there are a lot of reasons that it has become really common for people to feel shame after traumatic events and experiences. First of all, I think some shame has been taught to us from the world around us. I think we kind of absorb it. In some communities, things like purity or strength or family honor are tightly linked to one's identity. And any kind of trauma, but I think especially sexual trauma, can be perceived as some sort of like moral failure or a stain on a person, even if the person did nothing wrong. Or sometimes we hear questions or comments that imply that there's some sort of blame being put on the person who was victimized, like, well, what was she wearing? And was she flirting with the person? And things like that. What else?
I agree, and it's really sad, but it is a cultural thing now that's kind of become that way. And I think another reason that people can be really hard on themselves is because they maybe also didn't behave the way they thought they would, or the way that they expected themselves to behave in a situation. Something like, why didn't I scream? Or why didn't I fight back? Or why didn't I say something else or try to do something else? And if you don't realize that survival responses often limit what we're able to do in the moment, then you might blame yourself, and oftentimes very unfairly, because like you had said, you didn't cause it. It wasn't your fault. But people who feel shame think that it is.
Yeah, that's a great point about something that I think even a lot of experts, air quotes experts, don't really know that much about. Like they too might wonder, well, but why didn't you scream? Why didn't you
Mhm.
run away? So
Mhm.
we have a long way to go to train people to understand that sometimes that's just not accessible. Um, I also think shame is sort of self-protective. Um, yeah, in a weird way, it gives us like this false sense of control over the world. Like if I blame myself, then all I have to do is be better next
Mhm.
time, and
Mhm.
this won't happen to me again. So as long as this is my fault, I'm in control of it happening or not happening in the future. And the reality is violence can happen to anybody. And while there may be some things we can do to maybe reduce our chances, no one is
Mhm.
exempt or free of risk. But we don't want to think about that. We don't want to believe that I'm vulnerable at any moment. We don't want to believe that it could really happen at any time. It actually feels safer for a lot of people to think, no, 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 I did this to myself, because it creates that sense of control over things that we just don't control.
I totally agree. And it's such an important piece of understanding shame. And when I work with clients and help them understand why they blame themselves, and I think what you're talking about is that piece of control, because a lot of times, once the traumatic experience has happened, obviously the person feels what they were very much out of control, right? They were not in control of what happened to them or what happened to their body. And so any grasp at retaining that control or getting that control back is something that is going to feel protective, right? Something that makes sense. So helping someone understand that part of this feeling and this self-blame is simply to feel safe again and be able to protect themselves when they weren't able to really helps to reframe some of these emotions and things that come up after someone experiences trauma. So I really like that explanation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your context to it helps it come to life a little bit. So thank you. And look, I'm sure we are just skimming the surface of the many, many, many reasons people feel shame in the aftermath of trauma. But I'm glad we had this chat, because I think we casually mention shame a lot in this world or in our field. We just kind of throw it out there like, oh, well, of course the person had shame. Of course they were feeling shame. And I'm not sure how often we pause and think about like the purpose it's serving, either
Mhm.
culturally in communities, to like keep people in line, or the self-protective nature, or whatever it may be. But it seems to be doing something that maybe in some ways feels like it's helping, but it's ultimately harming. Um, Melanie, as always, thank you. Thank you for helping me navigate these tough conversations. Your input is really valuable because you're on the front lines, meeting with real people who face these challenges all the time. So thank you for sharing your time with us.
Of course, always happy to be here.